You get a headache, you walk to a cupboard, swallow a small white pill, and 20 minutes later it's gone. You break your arm, someone gives you morphine before they even touch it. You have surgery, they put you to sleep, open you up, take something out, and you feel absolutely nothing. Every one of those is about 200 years old. Our species is 300,000. So for 99.9% of human history, when something hurt, it just kept hurting until it stopped. Or until you did. And I think we quietly assume those people were tougher than us, that they had some hardened tolerance we've lost. They didn't, their nerves were your nerves, same spinal cord, same brain, same threshold. They just had nothing. And what they did about that is much stranger than you'd think. Start about 7,000 years ago in a place we now call Anthropology in eastern France. Archaeologists found the skull of a man who died in his 50s, and there are 2 holes in it. Not fractures, not damage, holes, one of them about 6 centimeters across, cut deliberately through the top of his skull. This is called Trepanation. You take a living human being and you open their head. And here's the thing about that skull, around the edges of both holes the bone has grown back, smooth and rounded and healed. Which means he was alive when it happened, and he stayed alive afterwards for years. He survived the first one. And then somebody did it again. No anesthetic, no antiseptic. No idea that infection existed. A conscious human being held down while someone worked through the bone of his skull with a sharpened stone. And the disturbing part isn't that they did it. It's how often it worked. Go to Peru. John Varahno spent 30 years studying trepan skulls from the Andes, hundreds of them. In the earliest period he looked at, roughly 40% of patients survived. By the time of the Inca, that number was over 80%. 8 out of 10 people walking around with a hole in their heads, healed. Now hold that next to something. During the American Civil War, surgeons opening a skull with steel instruments in a hospital with anesthesia lost about half their patients. 50%. So Stone Age surgeons in the Andes were better at opening a human skull than trained doctors with anesthetic 3,000 years later. Nobody is entirely sure how. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body sticking out of the ice. He had been there 5,300 years, we call him URTC. And when they examined his skin, they found 61 tattoos. Not pictures, not symbols, just simple lines and small crosses. And they're not spread evenly over his body, they cluster lower back, both knees, ankles, one wrist. Then they x-rayed him. He had degenerative arthritis in his lower back, in his knees, and his ankles. The tattoos sit directly on top of the joints that hurt. This isn't decoration. Somebody was marking the places that hurt and doing something to them again and again for years. The oldest tattoos we have ever found on a human being aren't art. They're a prescription. In 2022, researchers ran chemical residue analysis on a set of small ceramic juglets from Tel Yehud in Israel. The vessels are about 3,500 years old, late Bronze Age. They came back positive for opium. And these weren't found in a kitchen or a storeroom. They were found in graves, buried with the dead. Somebody in 1500 BC was putting opium into the ground with people they had lost. And it goes back a lot further than that. Poppy capsules turn up in Neolithic Spain in woven baskets thousands of years earlier. We were using the strongest painkiller on this planet for 3,000 years before anybody had the faintest idea what it actually was. But forget the spectacular stuff for a second. The most common agony in the ancient world wasn't a battle wound or a broken leg. It was a tooth. An abscess is a pocket of bacteria under pressure, pressing directly onto a live nerve, inside a piece of bone that cannot expand to make room for it. If you've had one, you know exactly what I'm describing. It's the pain that makes grown adults cry in a waiting room. Now take away the dentist, take away extraction, take away antibiotics, take away all of it. Go and look at ancient jaws sometime, they are full of these, craters eaten clean through the bone. It ended one of 2 ways. Either the infection drained on its own, or it got into your blood and it killed you. People died of toothache routinely for 100,000 years. None of this is fringe. The Onsisheim skull was published in Nature. Urtc's tattoos were published in the Lancet. The Opium was published in Archaeology. Varahno's Peruvian work runs to an entire book. And in 1763, an English clergyman called Edward Stone wrote to the Royal Society to report that he had been giving people powdered willow bark, and that it was bringing their fevers down. That's the record. Nature, the Lancet, the Royal Society. And all of it says the same thing. People were never passive about pain. They were experimenting constantly on each other for thousands of years. Okay, now the part that ruins the story. Because a lot of it worked, and we know exactly why. Start with the willow bark. Willow contains a compound called salicin. Your body converts salicin into salicylic acid. That is aspirin. Chewing willow bark is taking a real weak dose of a real drug. Edward Stone wasn't lucky, he was right. Opium is the same. That's not a folk remedy. Opium is morphine and codeine. It is the actual molecule we still use today in hospitals right now. And rubbing something that hurts, that works too, and it isn't imagination. In 1965, Melzack and Wall published what's called gate control theory. Touch and pressure signals travel along faster nerve fibers than pain signals do. So when you rub a knee you've banged, the touch signal physically arrives first and crowds the pain out at the spinal cord. Which might be exactly why tattooing an arthritic joint over and over did something. And then there's the strangest one. In 1978, 3 researchers gave people a placebo for pain and it worked, which we already knew. Then they gave them naloxone. Naloxone is the drug that blocks opioid receptors. And the placebo effect vanished. Which proves something genuinely odd. Placebo pain relief isn't people imagining they feel better. Believing that you are being treated causes your own brain to release its own opioids. A ritual with no active ingredient in it whatsoever can still produce real, measurable, chemical pain relief. So the whole picture changes. These weren't desperate people doing nonsense. They had a small, real pharmacy. They had their own brain chemistry. And across thousands of years of trial and error and an enormous number of dead patients, they found the handful of things on this planet that genuinely work. That isn't superstition, that's the slowest clinical trial in history. But there's one thing that still doesn't fit. It's the whole. Willow bark you could stumble onto. Somebody chews a twig, they feel better, they tell somebody else. Opium you could stumble onto. Nobody stumbles onto drilling a hole in a skull. That is not an accident anyone falls into, that's a decision. Somebody has to look at a person in agony and think, the answer here is to open their head, and then somebody else has to agree with them. And here's the part that gets me. It happens everywhere. Trepaned skulls turn up in France, in Russia, in North Africa, in China, in the Pacific Islands, in North America, in South America. Thousands of years apart, among people who had never met, who had no contact, who had no way of ever telling each other anything at all. Every single one of them, independently, arrived at the same idea. The most invasive, most terrifying, most counterintuitive medical idea a human being can possibly have. And our species invented it over and over and over again on every continent we ever reached. We still don't really know why. Pain is the one thing you can't show anybody. You can describe it, you can point at it, you can rate it out of 10, and none of that actually transmits. It stays inside the one body that's having it. And somehow, for 300,000 years, that completely private thing is what made total strangers hold someone down in the dark and try.